The digital countdown wall clock showed exactly 1 hour and 30 minutes. 90 minutes until the opening bell. Arthur Grant sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at the unread IPO prospectus on his tablet. 3 years ago, Vance Technology was just a damp basement with 3 secondhand laptops. He had written every line of the core architecture, pulled 80-hour weeks without complaining, and used his hidden connections to clear every regulatory hurdle. Today was supposed to be the day they went public on the NASDAQ. He reached down and adjusted his silver cufflinks, an anniversary gift from Evelyn Vance 2 years ago when they were still scrounging for seed money. The heavy glass door swung open without a knock. Evelyn walked in, her white designer coat trailing behind her. She looked like the definition of a successful tech CEO. Beside her stood Julian Hayes, the senior vice president of operations whom Evelyn had hired 6 months ago. "Arthur," Evelyn said, stopping in front of his desk. Her voice was flat and professional. "Step away from the terminal." Arthur looked up, keeping his expression neutral. "What's going on, Evelyn?" "The compliance team needs my final sign-off before we go live." Julian stepped forward with a slick smirk, tossing a thick leather folder onto Arthur's desk. "There won't be a sign-off from you today, Arthur. In fact, your presence here is no longer required." Arthur looked at the folder, then at Evelyn. "Is this a joke?" "It's not a joke," Evelyn said, crossing her arms. "As of 10 minutes ago, the board voted unanimously to revoke your entire access authority. Admin access, database encryption keys, financial authorization, and your title as CTO, all canceled." The office went completely silent. Arthur didn't panic or raise his voice. He just looked at Evelyn, the woman he had married 4 years ago, the woman he had protected while hiding his true identity as the sole heir to the Grant Consortium. He had deliberately played the quiet, supportive husband so she could take the spotlight. "On what grounds?" Arthur asked softly. "On the grounds of incompetence and security risk," Julian interjected, leaning over the desk. "We've audited your recent department output. You're holding this company back, Arthur." Evelyn is taking Vance Tech global. A guy with no elite background or real network like you doesn't fit the image of a public company executive. "Julian's right, Arthur," Evelyn added coldly. "You've hit your ceiling. I've tolerated your lack of vision out of gratitude for our past, but business comes first." Julian just brought in a $50 million line of credit from European investors. "What have you done lately besides sit in the server room?" She pushed a document toward him. It was a formal resignation letter along with a complete waiver of his founder's equity. "Sign it," Evelyn commanded. "I'll give you a severance payout of $200,000. That's more than enough for someone with your background." Julian sneered, leaning in closer. "Sign it, Arthur. Be a good little house husband and run along. You were just holding the seat warm until Evelyn found a real partner." Arthur looked Evelyn dead in the eye. "Did you two plan this together?" "I approved it," Evelyn answered without hesitation. "I need a partner who can stand beside me at the top, not a shadow who drags me down." Arthur looked at her for 3 seconds. For years of marriage and endless sacrifices dissolved in that moment. He didn't argue. He picked up his pen and signed his name at the bottom of the page in clean, sharp strokes. Arthur Grant. Then he unclipped the silver cufflinks from his wrists, placed them neatly beside the paper, and pushed them across the desk. "Keep them. They were bought with your money anyway." Evelyn frowned, clearly thrown off by how calm he was. She had expected him to beg, plead, or break down crying. Arthur picked up his black trench coat, threw it over his arm, and walked toward the door. As his hand touched the handle, Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Don't come crawling back when you realize how brutal the real world is, Arthur. Without me and Vance Tech, you're nothing. You'll be picking trash on the streets in a week." Arthur paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "Evelyn, do you honestly believe you built this company with your own capability?" She sneered. "Of course I did." Arthur gave a faint, cold smile. "Then let's see how long your empire lasts without its foundation." He walked out. As he walked through the open-floor office, employees stared in silence. Arthur took the elevator straight down to the underground parking lot and got into the back seat of an unmarked black sedan. He pulled out a secure satellite phone and dialed a private number. The line picked up immediately. "Young Master Grant," a respectful voice said. "Has your trial ended?" "It has, Director Vance," Arthur said, looking out the tinted window. "Execute Protocol 0. Terminate all Grant Consortium backend server authorizations. Pull the $50 million credit line disguised as European investment and notify the Nasdaq Regulatory Board. Understood, boss. Executing now. 10 minutes later, inside the executive suite, Evelyn was fixing her lipstick in front of a mirror, preparing to lead the team to the exchange floor. Julian was already pouring 2 glasses of champagne. Suddenly, the red emergency sirens on the wall started blaring. Beep, beep, beep. The door burst open, and the chief financial officer stumbled in, pale as a sheet. President Vance. Crisis. Total disaster. The CFO screamed. Evelyn snapped. What are you yelling about? We're about to go live. The SEC and Nasdaq regulatory boards just issued an emergency freeze order. The CFO yelled, trembling uncontrollably. Our IPO review has been forcefully terminated. All trading authorization codes have been wiped from the central server. Worse, the $50 million European credit line just vanished, and the entire database has locked us out. Evelyn dropped her champagne glass. It shattered across the floor. What did you say? Terminated. Why? The CFO held up his tablet, showing the official notice from the SEC. Notice of immediate IPO suspension, failure of core system authorization, and severe capital origin investigation. Authorized licensor, Arthur Grant. Evelyn staggered back against the wall, her mind going completely blank as the red emergency lights flashed across her face. Inside the executive conference room, panic spread like wildfire. Red error screens lit up the faces of 30 board members. This is impossible, Evelyn yelled, slamming her palms onto the glass table. Arthur is just a lead developer. How could his name be listed as the primary system licensor? Check the backend again. Override it. The new chief technology officer had his fingers flying across the keyboard, sweat dripping down his neck. I can't override it, President Vance. The entire backend isn't running on our local servers. It's hosted on the Grant Global Security Network. Arthur's personal cryptographic signature was the master key. When we wiped his access, the network flagged us as an unauthorized intrusion and locked the whole company out. Julian's face went white, but he quickly grabbed Evelyn's arm, his eyes darting around the room. Evelyn, listen to me. This is sabotage. Arthur knew we were letting him go, so he planted a malicious backdoor before he walked out. He's trying to ruin you. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table, her mind racing. Sabotage? Yes, that has to be it. He's doing this out of spite because I kicked him out. Exactly. Julian turned to the terrified board members, pointing at the main screen. Arthur Grant stole our proprietary tech and corrupted our financial ledgers. We need to handle this right now. Call the SEC, call the FBI, and call the press. Frame this as a corporate cyber attack by a bitter ex-employee. Within 20 minutes, Vance Tech released an emergency press statement accusing Arthur Grant of industrial espionage, corporate theft, and deliberate system destruction. Meanwhile, Arthur was sitting in the back of a luxury sedan, heading toward the city's private airfield. Sitting across from him was Marcus Vance, the managing director of the Grant Consortium's North American operations. Young master, Marcus said, handing Arthur an encrypted tablet. Evelyn Vance just mobilized her PR team. They're launching a smear campaign against you on every major news outlet. Should I shut down Vance Tech's remaining accounts immediately? Arthur took a sip of his water and looked out the window. Let them dig their own grave, Marcus. The higher they elevate their lies, the harder they're going to hit the pavement. His personal phone vibrated on the armrest. It was a video call from Evelyn. Arthur clicked accept. Evelyn's face filled the screen. She was back in her office, her hair slightly disheveled, her composure cracking at the edges. Arthur Grant. She barked into the phone. You petty, arrogant idiot. Do you really think you can hold me hostage with these cheap tricks? Planting malware in my system? Do you have any idea what you've done? Arthur kept his voice flat and steady. I told you, Evelyn. You didn't build this company. You were just sitting in the chair I built for you. Shut your mouth. Julian shoved his face into the camera frame beside her. Listen to me, you loser. We've already filed a formal complaint with the federal authorities. The police are looking for you right now for corporate espionage. If you don't get your ass back to this office in 15 minutes, unlock the system, and sign a full confession, I'll make sure you rot in a federal prison for the rest of your life. Arthur let out a dry, quiet laugh. Julian, You've been using Tech's offshore shell companies to launder money for your personal debt over the last 6 months, Arthur said casually. Did you really think I wouldn't track that? Julian's mouth went dry. What are you talking about? And Evelyn, Arthur continued, his eyes locked onto hers through the screen. I gave you 4 years. I gave you my time, my work, and my protection. Every time you made a mistake, I cleaned it up behind your back. But today, you decided to throw me away. Enjoy the next 24 hours. They're the last good moments you're ever going to have. Arthur, wait, Evelyn shouted. Arthur hung up and tossed the phone onto the leather seat. Marcus, Arthur said. Yes, boss. Put out a notice to every bank, investor, and tech firm in the region. The Supreme Executive Chairman of the Grant Consortium is holding an emergency summit tomorrow morning at the Grand Sovereign Club. Let's see who shows up. By 8 p.m., the local news was running nonstop coverage of Tech's failed IPO. Evelyn held an emergency press conference in the main ballroom of the Grand Hyatt. Dozens of reporters filled the room, camera flashes blinding the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn spoke into the row of microphones, maintaining a confident smile. Tech experienced a minor technical delay today due to an act of corporate sabotage. Our former CTO, Arthur Grant, was terminated earlier this morning for severe professional negligence. Unable to accept his dismissal, Mr. Grant illegally tampered with our servers before leaving. But I assure our investors and partners, Tech is entirely stable, and we will resume our public listing shortly. Julian stood right beside her, nodding aggressively. He leaned into the mic and added, We are officially offering a $100,000 reward for any information leading to Arthur Grant's arrest. 5 miles away, Arthur stood on the balcony of the Grant private estate, holding a glass of sparkling water. Behind him, Marcus stepped out onto the terrace with a tablet in hand. Boss, the traps are set, Marcus reported. First, the Treasury Department just froze Julian Hayes' offshore accounts after we flagged his money laundering history. Second, our 3 subsidiary suppliers have terminated all component shipments to Tech, effective immediately. Third, Swiss Global Bank has officially recalled their $200 million loan to Tech. Arthur didn't turn around. Did they cite a reason? They cited a breach of contract, Marcus replied with a cold smile. The loan was originally guaranteed under your personal credit line with the bank. Once you pulled your signature this afternoon, their risk management team triggered an automatic recall. What about Evelyn's personal assets? Arthur asked. The luxury cars, the penthouses, and the estate she lives in were all purchased through the Grant Family Trust, Marcus said. She thought she bought them with her corporate bonuses, but you signed the trust authorizations. I have the asset recovery papers ready. Arthur took a sip of his water. Hold off on serving the eviction papers until tomorrow. Let her enjoy her false hope for one more night. Back at the Grand Hyatt, the press conference was wrapping up when Evelyn's assistant rushed onto the stage. She stumbled past the reporters and whispered frantically into Evelyn's ear. Evelyn's fake smile evaporated instantly. What do you mean, recalled? She hissed under her breath. President Vance, Swiss Global Bank, just sent an emergency default notice. The assistant whispered, her voice shaking. They're demanding full repayment of our $200 million loan within 12 hours. If we don't pay, they're foreclosing on all our assets tomorrow morning. Julian grabbed the assistant by her shoulder. That loan wasn't due for 3 years. Why the hell are they calling it in now? The bank said. The principal guarantor pulled his credit line this afternoon. The assistant whimpered. Evelyn felt her head spinning. Guarantor? What guarantor? I never had a guarantor for that loan. Before she could process the shock, her phone vibrated in her hand. It was an incoming call from a private, encrypted number. She stepped away from the podium and answered it. President Vance speaking. Evelyn Vance, a stern, gravelly voice came through the speaker. It was Lord Alexander, the head of the regional banking syndicate. Your company is on the brink of complete liquidation. However, the Supreme Chairman of the Grant Consortium has agreed to grant you an audience tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the Grand Sovereign Club. Bring your board and your corporate seal. If you want to save Tech, do not be late. The line went dead. Evelyn stood frozen, her phone slipping slightly in her grip. Then, a wave of sheer relief washed over her face. Julian, she gasped, grabbing his arm with a wild look in her eyes. The Grant Consortium. The chairman of the grant consortium just invited us to a private meeting tomorrow morning. Julian's eyes went wide. The grant consortium? Evelyn, that's the biggest private equity group in the world. If we get their backing, we don't just survive, we become untouchable. Exactly, Evelyn said, her confidence instantly restoring itself. Arthur thought he could destroy me, but God is on my side. Tomorrow morning, I will convince the chairman to invest, and will crush Arthur like the bug he is. At 8:30 a.m., a fleet of black SUVs lined the private entrance of the Grand Sovereign Club. Armed guards in tailored black suits stood stationed at every door, checking credentials with military precision. A silver sedan pulled up to the security gate. Evelyn Vance, Julian Hayes, and 4 senior board members stepped out onto the driveway. Evelyn wore her sharpest designer power suit, her head held high, though her palms were slick with sweat. "Look at this," Julian whispered, glancing around at the security detail and the high-ranking politicians walking through the double doors. "This is real money. Arthur couldn't even get a job sweeping the floor in a place like this." "Keep your composure, Julian," Evelyn murmured, adjusting her blazer. "When we meet the chairman, let me handle the pitch. We frame Vance Tech as an innocent target of corporate terrorism by a bitter ex-employee. If the grant consortium buys our narrative, we get a blank check." A security officer escorted them into the Grand Imperial Hall. The room was packed with the region's elite, the mayor, the head of the SEC, global banking executives, and tech titans. Everyone stood in a quiet, respectful semicircle near the head of the long conference table. In the center of the room, a high-backed leather chair sat facing the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, its back turned to the crowd. Evelyn took a deep breath, stepped into the center of the room, and bowed her head slightly. "Honorable Chairman of the Grant Consortium," Evelyn announced, her voice filled with practiced reverence. "I am Evelyn Vance, CEO of Vance Technology. I am deeply honored by your invitation. We were recently targeted by a rogue, low-level developer named Arthur Grant, but with your group's backing." "Low-level?" A smooth, icy voice cut her off from the leather chair. The tone was sharp, commanding, and instantly recognizable. Evelyn's words caught in her throat. Her blood ran cold. That voice. The high-backed leather chair slowly rotated around. Arthur sat in the chair, wearing a bespoke navy suit, a sapphire ring glinting on his left hand. Surrounding him, 4 international billionaires stood with their hands folded respectfully, awaiting his orders. Arthur swirled a glass of water, his eyes locking onto Evelyn with utter coldness. Evelyn stumbled back 2 steps, her eyes bulging out of her head. "Hey, Arthur, what the hell are you doing sitting in the chairman's chair?" Julian's face went pale, but his temper flared. He pushed past Evelyn, pointing a finger directly at Arthur's face. "Hey, how did you sneak in here, you loser? Guards, arrest this guy. He's an escaped criminal who sabotaged our company." Smack. Before Julian could take another step, Marcus Vance stepped forward and delivered a devastating backhand across Julian's face. The blow sent Julian crashing hard onto the carpet. He spat out blood, clutching his swollen jaw in shock. "Insolent trash," Marcus thundered, his voice ringing through the entire hall. "You dare raise your voice and point a finger at the Supreme Chairman of the Grant Consortium, Lord Arthur Grant." The hall remained dead quiet. In unison, every mayor, billionaire, and bank executive in the room bowed 45 degrees toward Arthur, their voices echoing together. "Greetings, Chairman Grant." Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her feet. Her vision blurred, her legs gave out, and she collapsed straight onto her knees on the cold floor. The man she had looked down on for 4 years. The man she treated as a glorified house husband. The man she dumped and publicly slandered 24 hours ago was the absolute ruler of the Grant Consortium. Arthur set his glass down, stood up, and slowly walked over to where Evelyn was kneeling. His leather shoes stopped inches from her hands. He looked down at her shivering frame, his expression completely unreadable. "Evelyn," Arthur said quietly, "yesterday in your office, you told me that without you and Vance Tech, I was nothing. You said I'd be picking trash on the streets in a week." He leaned down slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "So tell me, Evelyn, who's picking trash today?" Evelyn knelt on the cold floor, her whole body shaking violently. Tears ruined her makeup, but she couldn't care less. Her pride, her status, and her reality had been completely destroyed in a single second. Arthur, no. Lord Arthur. Evelyn sobbed, reaching out with trembling hands to touch the hem of his pants. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. You never told me you were the heir to the Grant Consortium. Arthur took a step back, casually avoiding her touch. If I had told you, Arthur said with flat indifference, would you have cared about me? Or would you have just used my family's money to feed your ego? I kept my identity hidden to see if your feelings were real. For 3 years, I built your company from nothing, handled your problems in the background, and gave you everything. And the moment you thought you reached the top, you kicked me to the curb for Julian. Julian, bleeding on the floor, frantically crawled forward on his hands and knees. Lord Grant, please. It was all Evelyn. She planned the whole thing. She was the one who wanted to fire you. She told me you were useless. I was just following her lead. Julian, you lying bastard. Evelyn screamed, turning her head to glare at him with absolute hatred. You set me up. You told me you had European investors. You were laundering money through my company the whole time. Shut up, both of you, Arthur said quietly. One sentence, and the room went completely silent. Neither of them dared to make a sound. Marcus stepped forward with a black tablet in hand. Lord Grant, the federal authorities have finalized the indictment against Julian Hayes. The agents are waiting outside. The heavy double doors opened, and 4 armed federal agents marched into the hall. Julian Hayes, the lead agent, announced cold-faced. You're under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, international money laundering, and corporate espionage. You're looking at a mandatory 60 years without parole. No, no. Lord Grant, save me. Evelyn, do something. Julian screamed as the agents slammed him to the floor, slapped handcuffs on his wrists, and dragged him out of the room like dead weight. Evelyn watched her partner get dragged away, her heart sinking into total despair. Arthur turned his eyes toward the chief of financial regulation standing nearby. Director, what's the official status of VanceTech? The director bowed respectfully. Chairman Grant, due to severe accounting fraud, unpaid sovereign debt, and the revocation of all core system patents by your consortium, Vance Technology is officially insolvent. All corporate and executive assets have been frozen for immediate liquidation. No, no, Evelyn shrieked, clutching her head. My company, my apartments, my cars. Arthur, please. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. You were my wife, Arthur corrected her, his tone completely flat. The divorce papers you forced me to sign yesterday cut all ties between us. And as for your apartments and cars, they were bought through the Grant family trust. You never owned a single thing. Evelyn gasped, her eyes going wide as the horrifying truth hit her. Every piece of luxury she had bragged about, every high-end dinner, every piece of jewelry, was never hers to begin with. It was all provided by the man she had called a leech. Arthur, I was wrong. I was completely blind. Evelyn cried hysterically, bowing her head repeatedly against the floor. Julian manipulated me. I still love you, Arthur. Remember how we started in that tiny apartment? I cooked for you. We promised to build a life together. Please, give me one more chance. I'll do whatever you want. Arthur looked down at her forehead and her tear-stained face. He felt zero anger, only complete, absolute disgust. When you canceled my access yesterday, Evelyn, you didn't just take away my title, Arthur said, turning his back on her. You threw away the last bit of sympathy I had left for you. Marcus, Arthur commanded as he walked toward the private exit. Yes, boss. Execute the full asset recovery immediately. Evict her from the villa by noon. And make it clear to the entire industry. Anyone who tries to help Evelyn Vance financially will answer to the Grant Consortium. Consider it done, boss. Arthur. No. Arthur. Don't do this to me. Evelyn's hysterical screams echoed through the hall as the heavy elevator doors closed, cutting her off from his world forever. 3 days later, cold rain poured over the city. Outside the main iron gates of the Grant private estate, Evelyn stood shivering in the downpour. She wore soaked, dirty clothes, her designer makeup washed away, looking frail and completely hollowed out. Her penthouses were sealed by federal marshals, her sports cars towed, her bank accounts wiped out to the last dollar, and every former associate had blocked her number. She had gone from a rising tech star to an absolute outcast in 72 hours. For 3 straight days, she had waited outside the gate, begging the security guards for a single message to Arthur. The massive iron gates slowly unlocked and swung open. Evelyn's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Arthur, he's seeing me. She gasped, scrambling up from the wet pavement and stumbling forward. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled out of the driveway, flanked by two security SUVs. The Phantom came to a stop just outside the gate. Evelyn threw herself against the rear door, pounding on the glass and crying hysterically. Arthur, I know you're in there. Look at me. I learned my lesson. I was trash. I was stupid. Please, just let me back in. I don't care about the company or the money. I just want my husband back. Inside the plush rear cabin, Arthur adjusted his cuffs. Sitting beside him was Lady Victoria Sterling, heiress to the Sterling Financial Group and Arthur's new global business partner. Victoria glanced out the window at Evelyn with cold disdain. Is that your ex-wife, Arthur? How embarrassing. She had a gold mine and threw it away for a handful of dirt. She made her choice, Arthur said, his face completely emotionless. He pressed a button, rolling down the window halfway. Evelyn saw Arthur's sharp, untouched profile, and her frantic sobbing hit a peak. Arthur, please, look at me. Ms. Vance. Arthur spoke, his voice clear and icy over the sound of the rain. You're trespassing on private property. Arthur, please. Evelyn fell to her knees in the mud, bringing her trembling hands together in supplication. Give me one chance, just $1. A piece of bread. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Arthur looked at her without a trace of pity. 3 days ago, you told me that leaving you meant I'd be picking trash on the street. I'm just letting you live the reality you wished on me. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single silver cufflink, the matching pair to the one he had left on her desk, and tossed it into the puddle by her knees. We're done. Don't ever come near me again. Arthur pressed the intercom button. Driver, move. No. Arthur, don't leave me. Arthur. Evelyn screamed, diving face first into the mud to grab the cufflink. She clutched the wet piece of metal to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched the luxury convoy accelerate down the road, its taillights fading into the gray storm. She lay there in the mud, completely broken, knowing she would spend the rest of her life suffocated by her own regret. 1 month later, the giant digital screens across Wall Street flashed with breaking financial headlines. Grant Global Tech completes acquisition of Vance assets. New acoustic AI network valuation surpasses $500 billion. Inside the top-floor executive suite of the Grant Empire Tower, Arthur stood looking down at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Marcus walked in, carrying a file and a cup of black coffee. He set the cup on the desk and stood at attention. Boss, the integration is completely finalized. Grant Global Tech has absorbed all of Vance Tech's legacy infrastructure. Our market share in the sector just hit 92%. Arthur took a sip of the coffee. What's the status on the legal cases? Julian Hayes was sentenced yesterday, Marcus replied smoothly. 75 years in federal prison without eligibility for parole. He'll be spending the rest of his life in a maximum security facility in Colorado. And Evelyn? Arthur asked, his voice neutral. Her bankruptcy proceedings closed last week, Marcus said with a cold half-smile. She had no remaining liquid assets to pay off her court fees and back taxes. To avoid jail time, she took a state-assigned sanitation job in the lower industrial district. Our team saw her this morning sweeping the streets right underneath the Times Square billboard broadcasting your keynote speech. Arthur looked at his reflection in the glass, his expression unbothered. Actions have consequences. 5 miles away, in a cold, trash-strewn alley in the lower district, wind whipped through the streets. Evelyn, wearing an oversized, dirty reflective vest, gripped a heavy wooden broom with her raw, calloused hands. She winced from the pain in her fingers as she swept crumpled paper into a dustpan. Suddenly, the massive LED screen mounted on the building across the street lit up with a live broadcast. Arthur's face filled the screen. He was dressed in a sharp custom suit, flanked by international heads of state, accepting the Global Leader Award. His voice echoed clearly through the street speakers. True authority isn't built on arrogance, lies, or stepping on others to get to the top. It is built in silence, proven through results, and sustained by loyalty. Evelyn stopped sweeping. Her broom slipped from her fingers, clattering against the asphalt. She raised her hollow, sunken eyes, staring up at her ex-husband on the screen, the man who had cooked dinner for her every night when they were broke. The man who had quietly solved every crisis her company ever faced, the man she had thrown away like garbage, was now standing at the absolute peak of the world, completely untouchable. A single scalding tear cut through the grime on her face. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the pile of trash she had just swept up, clutching her stomach as a dry, breathless sob tore through her throat. "Arthur, I'm sorry," she whimpered to the empty street. No one answered. The broadcast moved on to the next segment, and the pedestrians walked past her without giving her a second glance. Back at the top of the Grand Empire Tower, Arthur set his coffee cup down, picked up his pen, and signed the final merger document on his desk. He closed the folder, his tone completely calm and decisive. "Game over. Next project."